I guess for anyone growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, as I did, obviously you are attuned to the Japanese sort of tuner culture. So my obsession with Mazda started, I was in high school. We had the option to take an auto technology course that allowed us to work on different engines and eventually cars. I did a project on the Rotary engine, and at that time, Mazda was still producing the RX-8, so that was the focus was that rendition of the Wankel engine. I mean, at the time, I think Japan was producing some of the purest sports cars the world has ever seen, and still, that being obviously the NSX, the Supra, the GTR, 300ZX, and of course the Mazda RX-7, which in my opinion was always the most beautiful. I think at the time maybe it was because it looks a little bit like the Viper, but once you start driving cars and you realize that if you want a pure driving sports car, you want something that's light and a high power to weight ratio. My name is Aaron Bax, and I drive a 2002 Mazda RX-7 Spirit R. Growing up, definitely immersed in Japanese culture, although, you know, in Canada, you don't get exposed to as much Japanese culture as you do American. When I was looking for an RX-8, I ended up making the mistake of test driving an RX-7. One of the guys I was potentially going to buy off of also had an RX-7 sitting in his garage. I mean, I already was familiar with the car. I knew that it wasn't really a practical car for what I needed at the time, but I took it out for a spin anyway, and after driving it for about 2 minutes, I knew that I was going to own one. It's not cheap to import a vehicle like that, especially with the rising prices. Maybe 5 years ago, it was still relatively, not inexpensive, but achievable for most people. But the way prices have gone now, if you're looking for a clean stock version of any of the Japanese legends, it's very, very hard to find anywhere in North America. High school, most of university, I saved up for a couple of years and ended up finding the perfect RX-7 for me. Really wasn't work to me, it was just something I would do on weekends and sometimes during the week. There are ways to check the Japanese auctions. And there's a few guys in Canada, one in Calgary, a Rotary specialist, Zen Auto Works, who helped me look. It took a while. It took me about 2 years to find it. I knew what I was looking for. That was black in color and a Spirit R. They put all the bits and parts throughout all the generations of the FD into the Spirit R. So 1,000 of them were the Type A. This is the one that are the most coveted. So because of that, when they do pop up, they are much more expensive, and a lot of dealers are now buying them in Japan as well. White RX-7s are the most expensive, obviously because of Initial D, the show, very famous Japanese show. It was harder to find a black RX-7 Spirit R. There was just not as many made. The majority were in metallic titanium gray. I just think black suits the car more. It's higher maintenance, but when it's taken care of, it's the most beautiful thing. My father was a bit of a gearhead. He enjoyed taking an engine apart, rebuilding it, boring out the cylinders so to increase the engine displacement. But I mean, by the time I was born, he switched more. I mean, he's driving Volvos, which I drive a Volvo now too, but for weekends, it's fun to have something that you can go through the canyons, a little bit more visceral and connected to the road. The importing process was long, but in the end, there's lots of cars coming on the market in Japan for auction. So one of the difficulties with importing is you don't actually get to see the vehicle. You have to go by the Japanese auction sheet. You either need to be able to read Japanese or have someone translate it for you and then try to make the best judgment. Yeah, once the vehicle is bought, just getting it on a boat and over to North America is a bit of a process, and then getting it registered. It's getting harder and harder to be able to register. My generation, again, growing up with a lot of video games, Gran Turismo, and I think that video game actually introduced me to a lot of the Japanese sports cars initially. I wouldn't have considered myself a Mazda fanboy at all. I was, a bit obsessed with the engine. When you drive one, you do kind of feel like you're driving something totally different than a piston engine. It does feel a little bit racier, smoother. Overall, I think the sound as well can be much more unique. The value of them had plummeted quite a bit because a lot of people are scared of the rotary engine. But, there's a few maintenance things you need to keep up with. And if you do that, most Rotaries will last a long time. You know, Mazda, clearly they care about the driving experience. It's true, once you drive one, you really can see what they were going after. For the most part, the maintenance is frequent oil changes, as well as frequent spark plug changes, because they tend to foul much more quickly. You really do need to take it out and stretch its legs, preferably once every drive. But obviously this is impossible if you're sitting in traffic. As a daily, it is more difficult to maintain, but you should know your way around a car and be able to do some of it yourself, because in the end, no one's going to treat your car the way that you treat it and know it. So this version of the RX-7 received several upgrades. So for the Type A, it got the carbon fiber Recaro bucket seats, the larger piston calipers. This ended up being the same on actually all the 2002 models, but they did get the forged BBS wheels, Bilstein shocks. In the final series of the FD, they had made some changes to the turbos, 2 sequential turbos. All of that came from factory, so my vehicle is 100% stock. I wanted something that was completely original. I feel like the car from the factory is perfect. I have no reason to change anything on the vehicle. I wouldn't consider myself a collector, although the vehicle I found is, I guess, a pretty rare car. You know, I bought it to drive it. I didn't buy it to store it away and then, you know, sell it for more at a later date. You know, I'm always going to love to drive. You know, maybe taking the RX-7 to the track at this time, maybe in the future. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I have my Eleanor. This search is over and I can just enjoy the Holy Grail.